Ready?
Mm-hmm.
I love to read. Do you love to read? Well, then let's talk about books. See what I made it into a book. Okay, again. Let me walk in again through the door. Well, hello, and thank you for joining me at my book club meeting. Here's what I read in 2017.
January. I started 2017 in Shanghai, China. Read Azalea by An Chi Min. Loved this book. It's a memoir of the Cultural Revolution in China, and An Chi Min writes in a very lyrical, mesmerizing way. Next was Country Driving, a Chinese road trip by Peter Hessler. Peter Hessler is a journalist, and I absolutely love his work. He lived in China for years, starting when he was a Peace Corps volunteer in the 1990s, and I so enjoy reading his take on modern China. Then I read The Chaperone by Laura Moriarty. This was some nice historical fiction. Real-life silent film star Louise Brooks is a character in it. February. I read Down the Rabbit Hole, Curious Adventures and Cautionary Tales of a Former Playboy Bunny by Holly Madison. I've never had any interest in being a Playboy bunny, but I found Holly's description of life inside the Playboy mansion pretty fascinating. To All the Boys I've Loved Before by Jenny Han. This was a young adult soap opera, very easy and fun reading. March, still in China. First book I read in March was Strange Stones by Peter Hessler, which was a collection of many of Hessler's New Yorker magazine articles. I will read anything this man writes. All the articles in this book were interesting, and some were particularly interesting or downright hilarious to me. I especially love Chinese barbizon. It cracked me up and it reflected so well on the China I have come to know and love. You can read this online on thenewyorker.com right now. Next was Black Square, Adventures in Post-Soviet Ukraine by Sophie Pinkham. I got this one from the online library when I found out I was accepted into Peace Corps Ukraine. It was very interesting. Then Everything Everything by Nicola Yoon. I read it in one day on the train, I think from Xi'an to Beijing. Very nice young adult novel. Revolutionary Road by Richard Yates. It's about a sad couple in the 1950s. I loved reading this author's prose. April. In April, I left China and went back to California and stayed with my family for a month. First April book, Daring Greatly, How the Courage to be Vulnerable Transforms the Way We Live, Love, Parent, and Lead by Brené Brown. I heard this recommended by fitness guru Jillian Michaels and was surprised to find out some of my friends were also reading it too. Apparently, it was very popular. Next, The Course of Love by Alain de Botton, however you say his name, I'm not sure. This is about a married couple weathering the trials of long-term love. Then I listened to The Girl with the Lower Back Tattoo by Amy Schumer. Some of Amy's stories in this collection are funny, some are decidedly not, like her essays on domestic abuse and gun violence, but all were very interesting to me. I specifically enjoyed her insider's take on the American comedy and entertainment industry. Next, I listened to Modern Romance by Aziz Ansari. I loved this book, and I'm glad I listened to Aziz Ansari read it because hearing his words in his own voice made it doubly funny. What I really liked about this celebrity-written book was that it was about an actual subject, that is modern romance and dating in the age of the internet. Fresh Off the Boat by Eddie Huang. I never knew much about this minor celebrity Eddie Huang, but it was interesting to hear about his life growing up as an American-born Chinese. Next, I read Grace by Natasha Dion. I came across an article in the local paper about the author, and it turns out she's from my hometown, and I was blown away by her book. It was a haunting story set in the American South in the mid-1800s, told through the eyes of a woman who had been killed. A ghost is the narrator, but I would not call it a ghost story. I couldn't put it down. It gave me chills at times, and I almost cried at the end. May. In May, I moved to Kotzebue, Alaska. All the books I finished this month, I listened to on tape through the Overdrive Internet Library program. First was Hillbilly Elegy, written and read by J.D. Vance. This book was popular this year because everyone wanted to figure out how Trump could have gotten elected, or so I read in some reviews. Yes Please, written and read by Amy Poehler. This is the second time I've listened to this book and was amazed at how much I'd forgotten from the first listening a few years ago when it came out. Settle for More, written and read by Megyn Kelly. I gave Megyn Kelly's book a shot because my mom likes her. I loved hearing about her experiences as a lawyer and journalist. I did not expect to like this book as much as I did. June. In June, I listened to Bossy Pants, written and read by Tina Fey. Like my second listening of Amy Poehler's Yes Please last month, this was the second time I'd let Tina graciously read her book to me. Then I listened to The Lion in the Living Room by Abigail Tucker, which was about the natural history and ecology of domesticated cats. I had no idea how invasive they are in some places and how they wreak havoc on local populations of birds and other small animals. This is not an anti-cat book, but rather a comprehensive picture of an animal so common that we usually take it for granted. I definitely recommend this book. Then I read Julie of the Wolves by Jean Craighead George. This book I'd been meaning to read for like 25 years, since I was a little kid, because it's about a girl who befriends a wolf pack in the wilderness and they help her survive. What kid doesn't fantasize about running off with wolves? Fittingly enough, I read it up in Arctic Alaska, where it was set. July. I didn't finish any books in July. I was either too busy at work or playing Ticket to Ride or Catan or doing insanity with my friends. August. In August, I finished only one book, the sequel to Julie of the Wolves, entitled Julie, also by Jean Craighead George. This one was good too. September. Again, I finished no books this month. September was busy because I left Kotzebue, had 3 days in California to repack for Peace Corps, and then moved to Ukraine. October. October was very productive as I finished 7 books, mostly because the host family's apartment where I lived in Ukraine didn't have internet. First book I finished was Brooklyn by Colm Toibin. Really enjoyed this historical fiction about an Irish woman who makes a life in Brooklyn in the 1950s. Next was The Case Against Sugar by Gary Taubes, which asserts that sugar is the cause of many health conditions that plague us. Favorite parts: the history of sugar production, colonialism, and the 20th century candy business. Truly Madly Guilty by Leanne Moriarty, the 4th novel by Aussie writer Leanne Moriarty that I've read. I enjoyed this Aussie domestic drama, though not quite as much as some of her other books. Then I read The Sun is Also a Star by Nicola Yoon. I loved this young adult novel, told through multiple perspectives from different characters, which is a plot device I really enjoy. Also, I loved the cover art. It's thread art. Next, I listened to Pitbull, The Battle Over an American Icon by Bronwyn Dickey. Boy, I loved this book. It's nonfiction about pit bulls, but about so much more, like human psychology and the media and bias and misinformation, the nature of fear, species and breed vilification, and on and on. Next, I read The Underground Railroad by Colson Whitehead. This was a brutal book, and slightly magical and science fiction-y and totally absorbing. After that, I wanted some light reading, and I just wanted to know what happened, so I listened to Hillary Clinton tell me what happened. Well, a lot of stuff happened, apparently. My favorite part was hearing what it was like to be part of a major presidential campaign, which is something I doubt I'll ever know firsthand. November. Finally, the November rain rolled around. In honor of my friend Bobby, who's an ornithologist, I listened to The Genius of Birds by Jennifer Ackerman. I have little interest in birds, but after reading this well-written and fascinating book, I now have a deeper appreciation for them. This book confirmed my suspicions that corvids, for example crows and ravens, are the best birds in the world. Sing Unburied Sing by Jesmyn Ward. I saw this advertised in The New Yorker, and since I do everything The New Yorker tells me to do, I got it from the internet library and gave it a try. It was about ghosts and drugs and dysfunctional families in the South, told from multiple perspectives, which is a narrative device I really enjoy, if I hadn't said so already. Next, Turtles All the Way Down, the new one by John Green. This is the 4th book I've read by John Green. He's a great author. The narrator was a quirky teenager, and when I finished, I wanted to continue interacting with the characters in the story, and that to me is the sign of a good book that I connected with. Perks of Being a Wallflower by Stephen Chbosky. Not sure how to say his name. I definitely enjoyed this book, and I read it in 3 days. And then I got into something I'd been meaning to get into for years, the Walking Dead graphic novels. First, of course, was The Walking Dead Volume 1, Days Gone by Robert Kirkman and Tony Moore. I had seen Season 1 of Walking Dead back when I lived in Death Valley, and I loved the show, and then I saw that most of the graphic novel issues are available on the internet library, so why not? I got very engrossed in this graphic novel and read it in an evening. December! And that brings us to December, my most productive month of reading yet, especially if you count graphic novels. First, The Mountain Between Us by Charles Martin. 2 near strangers get stranded in snowy mountains and have to survive, and their experiences are very painful and cold, so I'm glad I got to read about their adventure instead of experiencing it firsthand. Next, I listened to author Michael Pollan read Cooked, A Natural History of Transformation. I don't like cooking shows, but I found this book fascinating. Michael Pollan divides it into fire, barbecue, water, cooking stovetop, air, baking, and earth, fermentation, and talks about current and historical trends in these areas and the sociology of food. Then I went on a binge of graphic novels. I read The Walking Dead, Volume 2, Miles Behind Us, and Redwall, the graphic novel, based on the actual novel by Brian Jacques that I read and loved back when I was 10 years old, and illustrated by Brett Blevins, who did some brilliant work for this book and really brought it all to life. Then I read Imagine Wanting Only This, a graphic novel by Kristen Radke. This one was very cool, about abandoned places, ruins, the eventual collapse and disappearance of everything around us. It was also very memoiric. Favorite part, when the author is imagining what Manhattan will look like if it is ever engulfed by rising sea levels. If you're interested in an artistic graphic novel, I recommend this. Finally, I read Volume 3 of The Walking Dead, Safety Behind Bars. Oh, they found a prison, and boy, the plot is really heating up. Next, back to word books, I read Wonder by R.J. Palacio. Everyone seems to be losing their minds over how heartwarming and touching this book is. It's about a boy with a craniofacial disorder who goes to school starting in 5th grade, and some people are nice to him and some people are mean to him, but then everyone loves him because he's such a cool kid. The ending almost made me cry. Almost. Then I read Murder on the Orient Express by Agatha Christie, which was published in the 1930s and has passages that reflect that, like how certain crimes are passionate Latin crimes and others are calculated crimes from an Anglo-Saxon brain. In the end, I enjoyed it more than I thought I would. Then there was The Hidden Life of Trees by Peter Wollenben, which I read in honor of my best botanist friend Peter Frank, who is so interested in boring old plants, and I never had any idea why, but reading this book definitely opened my eyes to how amazing trees and the rest of the plant kingdom can be. Then back to some light reading, Walking Dead Volume 4, The Heart's Desire. Everyone is so dramatic in this series. Some of the characters are very annoying, but I cannot stop reading. Now for something a little more meaningful, I listened to Ta-Nehisi Coates read his book, Between the World and Me, which was an open letter to his teenage son on the subject of race and being black in the United States. This was heavy subject matter, very heartbreaking at times, and I think it would do us well if more people would read it. The penultimate book I finished this year was American Vampire, a graphic novel by Scott Snyder, Stephen King, and Raphael Albuquerque. Not gonna lie, I really liked it, and I want to read the next issues. Finally, the last book I finished in 2017 was Brain on Fire, My Month of Madness by Susanna Cahalan. This is a memoir by a journalist who suffered a major neurological illness in her mid-20s. I enjoyed this memoir a lot, though it is terrifying how fragile our minds and bodies can be. I'm currently reading The True Meaning of Smekte by Adam Rex, which was made into that cute movie Home, The Princess Diarist by Carrie Fisher, Mindhunter, inside the FBI's elite serial crime unit by John Douglas, now a Netflix series, Uncommon Type, short stories by Tom Hanks, which he's reading to me on audiobook, The Lone Ranger and Tonto Fist Fight in Heaven by Sherman Alexie, Coyote America, A Natural and Supernatural History by Dan Flores, which is awesome, and it's about my favorite animal, The World Without Us by Alan Weisman, and Mockingjay by Suzanne Collins, which I started nearly a year ago, but I'm gonna finish it this year, I swear. Now, let's take a look at some recommendations. Our first recommendations come from my great friend Sarah Jean Downey. She recommends Yoga Girl by Rachel Brathen. I have no idea what this is, but I want a pair of those pants. And The Promise of a Pencil, How an Ordinary Person Can Create Extraordinary Change by Adam Brown. My park ranger friend Meredith Elgart recommends The Warmth of Other Suns, the epic story of America's Great Migration by Isabel Wilkerson. I've wanted to read this book for a couple of years and it looks amazing, and I'm very glad Meredith suggested this. My lovely relative Prudence Noon recommends Lab Girl by Hope Jarin, A Higher Call, an incredible true story of combat and chivalry in the war-torn skies of World War II by Adam Makos with Larry Alexander, The Last Painting of Sarah DeVos by Dominic Smith, and A Gentleman in Moscow by Amor Towles. My fellow Peace Corps volunteer Brianna Moody recommends When Breath Becomes Air by Paul Kalanithi. and Being Mortal by Atul Gawande. My old roommate and friend Zach Lee also recommends an Atul Gawande book, Complications, A Surgeon's Notes on an Imperfect Science. Katerina Knapp, one of my Ukrainian teachers, recommends 1984 by George Orwell, which I read in high school and should read again. Kind of a creepy cover. This cover is creepy as hell too. Turn of the Screw by Henry James is recommended by my childhood friend Brittany Russell, who is on a gothic kick. Both Brittany and Katerina recommend Jane Eyre by Charlotte Bronte. Grazie, Brittany, and Dyakuyu, Katerina. My aunt Barbara Falconer Newhall, who is herself an author, recommends Hillbilly Elegy by J.D. Vance, which I listened to in 2017 and also recommend. Aunt Barbara also recommends Prairie Fires, The American Dreams of Laura Ingalls Wilder by Caroline Fraser. My fellow park ranger J.B. Cooperman suggests 1491, New Revelations of the Americas Before Columbus by Charles D. Mann, and sequel 1493, Uncovering the New World Columbus Created, both of which look ridiculously fascinating, and also Eating Animals by Jonathan Safran Foer. My friend Elizabeth Wong recommends the Myron Bolitar series by Harlan Coben. These'll keep you busy. Muay Thai filmmaker extraordinaire Timo Rouge recommends The Conversations, Walter Murch and the Art of Editing Film by a gentleman whose last name I have no hope of pronouncing correctly, Michael Ondaatje? My brother Eric recommends Red Harvest by Dashiell Hammett, who is better known for his book The Maltese Falcon. Now there's some confusion if Eric meant to recommend Red Harvest or Red Famine, Stalin's War on Ukraine by Anne Applebaum, which just came out a few months ago. Luckily, Linda Dan recommends this important book, so it's included on this list. Holly Carew in Jolly Old England suggests Don't Shoot the Dog, The New Art of Teaching and Training by Karen Pryor, which Holly says is about a lot more than just dog training. Fellow Peace Corps volunteer Jason McCullough recommends A Reasonable Life, Toward a Simpler, Secure, More Humane Existence by Ferenc Mattei, and The Sex Life of Cannibals, Adrift in the Equatorial Pacific by J. Martin Troost. Canadian friend John Douglas recommends Trust Me, I'm Lying, Confessions of a Media Manipulator by Ryan Holiday, which sounds very relevant and timely, and The Truth Matters, A Citizen's Guide to Separating Facts from Lies and Stopping Fake News in Its Tracks by Bruce Bartlett. Lisa Petrangelo recommends What Would Judy Say? A Grown-Up Guide to Living Together with Benefits by Judy Scheinlin. I love Judge Judy. My other brother, Wayne Harris, recommends Howard Zinn's A People's History of the United States, which I've been meaning to read since high school. My cousin Emily Newhall recommends a lot of books. The Night Circus by Erin Morgenstern. The Grass Harp by Truman Capote. The 13th Tale by Diane Setterfield. The Murder of Roger Ackroyd by Agatha Christie. The Gun Seller by famous actor Hugh Laurie. The Meaning of Night, A Confession by Michael Cox. Armistead Maupin's Tales of the City, and as someone who partially grew up in San Francisco, this would probably make me very nostalgic. And finally, Emily Newhall recommends Wrestling with God, Stories of Doubt and Faith, written by my aunt Barbara Falconer Newhall. Yes! My fellow Boxtown, Alaska resident, Lydia Wilson, recommends The Yoga of Max's Discontent by Karen Bajaj. Baha? Looks funky. And neon. My beloved former roommate and best botanist friend Peter Frank suggests The Forest Unseen, A Year's Watch in Nature by David George Haskell. Well, no surprises there. The Diversity of Life by Edward O. Wilson. Braiding Sweetgrass, Indigenous Wisdom, Scientific Knowledge, and the Teachings of Plants by Robin Wall Kimmerer. And also by Robin Kimmerer, Gathering Moss, A Natural and Cultural History of Mosses. Oh, you gotta be kidding me. Okay, PF, I'll read about the natural and cultural history of mosses if you read about the natural and supernatural history of my favorite animal, the noble coyote. Actually, I bet this moss book is surprisingly fascinating. Just like this next one, Trevor Corson's The Secret Life of Lobsters, How Fishermen and Scientists Are Unraveling the Mysteries of Our Favorite Crustacean, as recommended by another fellow park ranger, Peter Winfrey. I didn't know lobsters were widely known as our favorite crustacean. Learn something new every day. My ornithologist friend, Bobby Walsh, who is also one of my oldest friends, hopes that in 2018 we will all read Cookie Soup and Other Goodnight Stories by Michaela Muntean and illustrated by Joe Ewers. This is one of Bobby's favorite contributions whenever we play charades. Bobby also recommends Ina Garten's Cooking for Jeffrey, a Barefoot Contessa cookbook. Who the hell is Jeffrey? I would prefer to read Cooking for Lindsay by Bobby Walsh, or by anyone. Bobby also creatively recommends that I watch TED Talks in preparation for your own inevitable Why I Joined the Peace Corporation in Ukraine in my mid-30s, not that it's any of your business, but I'll tell you anyways, TED Talk. Thanks, Bobby. Seldom seen Jackie Bennett suggests The Radium Girls, The Dark Story of America's Shining Women by Kate Moore. Jackie is very elusive by nature, and the fact that she came out of hiding to recommend this book makes me think it must be extremely important. My gentleman Matthew Yarbrough puts forth Dark Matter by Blake Crouch, Ready Player One by Ernest Cline, and Snow Crash by Neil Stevenson. Matthew, do you really think I'll enjoy this book?
I'm not really sure. It's a lot of sci-fi.
Matthew's other recommended reading for 2018 is The Back of a Cereal Box and a newspaper pulled from a dumpster. Well, that's a way to be green in 2018. I also asked for a few podcast recommendations, and here's what we got. This Week in Parasitism, suggested by my relative Natasha Hunt. Sword and Scale, proposed by John Douglas, as well as Serial, which I can confirm is really good. Tiara Chapman recommends Questlove Supreme. And my brother Eric suggests Stay Tuned with Preet and Star Talk with Neil deGrasse Tyson. Great suggestions, everyone. Thank you. Thank you to everyone who recommended all these titles. I think we're all old enough now to have a book club, so maybe if anyone wants to have a book club, we can have a book club. I don't know what that even means, but it'll be fun. Happy reading.